Hello and welcome to the Astral Observatory. This is the first episode of what I hope to be a weekly series where I sit down and give my opinion on something to do with Legend of Zelda. This first episode, we're going to leap right into one of the most contentious, controversial topics in modern-day Zelda, and that is the new Link's Awakening remake. More specifically, the graphical style of the Link's Awakening remake. Now, when I consume video essays and read arguments, I prefer the ones that jump headfirst into their opinion instead of dilly-dallying around the point, so I'm going to give my opinion right up front. I love what I've seen of the remake. I think that the graphic style looks amazing. I'm a huge fan of Link's Awakening, and I am always looking for another excuse to play it, so everything I've seen from the trailer is really endearing to me. However, that hasn't been the case for a lot of people. In fact, there are a lot of people who are really upset by this. They think that the graphics should have been more realistic, or even if they don't want them to be realistic, they don't want them to be this sort of toy box themed graphic style that Nintendo seems to have gone with. Now, there's a long history of this in Legend of Zelda, and I'm sure anybody who's listening to this knows that. Ever since Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, there have been people who have been upset with the graphical choice of every single Legend of Zelda game with the exception of Twilight Princess. When Wind Waker was announced, people were really disappointed because Nintendo made the mistake of showing that picture of the Legend of Zelda tech demo previously for the GameCube of Link and Ganon fighting, so people naturally assumed that that's what the first GameCube game was going to be, and so when Wind Waker, this complete 180-degree change happened, people were really shocked and a lot of people were really upset. Of course, nowadays, Wind Waker is considered a classic. In fact, visually, the HD remake of Wind Waker generally tends to be a lot more appreciated than the HD remake of Twilight Princess because these cartoon sort of graphics tend to age a lot better. And you saw this repeat when Skyward Sword came out. A lot of people were really upset. They were wanting it to go back to sort of the Twilight Princess style of things. And obviously Skyward Sword is a very contentious game in its own right, and a lot of people don't like it. But one thing you're not going to hear very many people trash talk about Skyward Sword nowadays is its graphics. People really like Skyward Sword's graphics. And then, yet again, we saw this with Breath of the Wild. When Breath of the Wild first came out, a lot of people were really upset that it didn't have this hyper-realistic sort of graphics. And then the game finally came out and the sort of pastel, borderless graphic style really endeared a lot of people and blew a lot of people away, myself included. I can sit there and stare at that game all the time. Its graphics are a large part of the reason why I love that game so much. So yeah, Legend of Zelda, there is a long history of games coming out and being chastised for not being the same way as Twilight Princess. And in that sense, I almost wish that Twilight Princess came out with a cartoony graphic style too, just so people would stop comparing everything to Twilight Princess. And obviously it's a minority of people, but it still happens with every single release. And in terms of Link's Awakening, the graphics for Link's Awakening are so completely different than anything we've seen before that it's not shocking that it did take everybody by surprise. I've seen a lot of people say that Link looks like a Funko doll, which I can kind of agree with, but my thing is, I don't understand why that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, Legend of Zelda games that take really bold stylistic choices often turn out to be the ones that we remember the most. I do understand why people want this sort of hyper-aggressive realism, but I honestly think a lot of the people who are wishing that this game would have had a realistic graphic style have never actually played Link's Awakening, because if you did, you would know that realistic graphics would not suit the game at all. Link's Awakening isn't a regular Zelda game. It sort of stands with Majora's Mask as almost not a black sheep, because it is well loved, just like Majora's Mask is well loved, but it does really stand on its own as a sort of side game, quite different from the rest of the series. But whereas Majora's Mask focused on sort of being really dark and foreboding and depressing, Link's Awakening focused on being this bizarre, trippy, childlike dreamscape. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some darker parts to Link's Awakening, but to the people that I actually heard Zelda Master say this in his video, the people who are saying that Link's Awakening is a dark game, I think are just wrong. Like, there are far more lighthearted and bizarre things in it than there are deep and ominous things. So to me, having a really realistic style would just be bizarre. Could you imagine having a realistic style and then coming across a Chain Chomp or a Goomba? Like, it would just be weird. Or a Cheep. Like, the presence of these Mario enemies in the game should signify that this isn't a regular Zelda experience. This is Link imagining something in his head. This is a dreamscape, and a dreamscape doesn't usually have hyper-realistic graphics. I've also seen a lot of people who are okay with the graphics themselves, but just really have a problem with the character model for Link. And that, I actually think, is a much more reasonable opinion to have. I can 100% understand why people would have a problem with Link. And to be honest, I have a little bit of reservations myself. The fact that he doesn't really have much in the way of a face, just kind of, you know, those two eyes and a mouth, is a little concerning. It makes me wonder how he's going to express himself. But there is a reason behind it. They didn't just give him that face to sort of cheap out. If you played Link's Awakening DX and you collected all the photographs, you'll recognize that Link's face is actually really similar to the face he has in the majority of the photographs. There are a couple photographs where he has sort of like full-on anime eyes like we saw in the anime intro, but for the most part, he does have those sort of just tiny little black slits, and the 3D model they made does look like that photograph version quite a bit, so I think they were successful in what they were trying to go for. But I do understand why people are a little bit bothered with that. Making a character who looks a little bit more like the Link with anime eyes probably would have gone over a little bit better, but I think that the choice they made is brave, and I'm excited to see how it pans out. You'd be surprised how much you can do with a little amount of expression. Nintendo is a master of giving a lot of personality to things that otherwise don't seem like they should have personality. I mean, just look at the Bob-omb companions you can get in Paper Mario. They don't have a lot in the way of facial expressions either, but they certainly are well-rounded characters. I think that the anime cutscene at the beginning was amazing. I loved it. I've watched it dozens of times since. But I almost do think that going with that anime intro was a mistake, because I think that seeing that intro sort of is what let a lot of people down, because they see this really awesome anime intro, and so they're assuming that there's going to be like an anime style to the main graphics, and then boom, they're hit with this sort of toy box graphic style. And it is understandable why you would be let down from that. So while I do think that the anime cutscene is really fantastic, and I would love to see more anime cutscenes in the Zelda games going forward, I do think that maybe it wasn't the best thing to lead with. I think maybe leading with the regular graphics first and then the anime cutscene maybe at the end might have been better, but I understand that would have taken a lot of the surprise away. So I think Nintendo was kind of, darn if you do, darn if you don't in that situation. But yeah, overall, I love the style. I don't think that it's fair to say that the art style is bad just because it's not realistic, because there's been way more artsy cartoon Zelda games than there have been, sort of photorealistic Zelda games. I do understand why people have a problem with Toy Box Link, or Chibi Link as a lot of people are calling him. But I also understand why Nintendo did it, and I think it's a brave and interesting choice. And I think people just need to realize that there is a method to the madness. There's a reason that Nintendo chose this art style, and I hope that people are willing to give the game a chance anyways, because Link's Awakening is an amazing experience, and people are really missing out. Especially people who have never played the game before are really missing out if they choose not to experience it just because of the graphics. At least do yourself a favor and go play the old ones on the Game Boy Color or the regular Game Boy and experience the ridiculousness that that game has to offer. Thanks for checking this first episode of the Astral Observatory out. If you have something you'd like me to talk about next week, drop a comment and I'll definitely give it a consider. I'll post a link to the next episode in this series here when it comes out, and if you liked this, I'll also post a link to my other series, Hyrule History, which is a very, very in-depth dive on a single topic, much like this, but focusing more on the nouns of the Zelda universe, like the characters and the monsters and the places. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, please check the video out, and subscribe wouldn't hurt either. Thanks for watching.